Say hi. Hi, YouTube. Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. My name is Mallory and this is Max joining me for this video. And in this video, I'm going to be sharing with you Max's birth story. I have really been looking forward to filming this video. I've been working on his birth story for pretty much almost since I gave birth. It's a very long story, so grab a cup of coffee or tea or your favorite beverage and just sit down, relax, maybe sit down to nurse your own baby while you're watching this, because chances are you're a mom too, or you're pregnant and looking for birth stories out there to be encouraged. So this is a very positive story. I'm very proud of our story together of his birth. And I just want to encourage you guys that are preparing to give birth, or maybe also gave birth in an unexpected way, because if you probably see from the title, I had an emergency C-section with him, which obviously was not the plan. So I just want to encourage everyone out there who maybe had a birth that they weren't expecting, or you're trying to prepare yourself mentally for what could happen. And yeah, this is just a positive story of an emergency C-section. So let's jump in. Well, my due date was January 8th, 2020, and he was born on his due date. So because of the circumstances surrounding his birth story actually starts the day before he was born. So this story starts on January 7th, 2020, and this is partly why it's so long, because I feel like in order to best tell his story, we need some context. Possibly a lot of people viewing this video are those who are completely new to my channel. Maybe this is the first video that you've ever watched from me. And so I want to give some context so you know where I'm coming from. So I am a military wife. My husband is in the Army. He's been in the Army for over 10 years. And I first got pregnant with him while we were stationed in Germany. So we lived in Germany from the end of 2017 till the end of 2019. So about 2 years. Most of my pregnancy happened in Germany all the way up to my third trimester. And then at the very beginning of my third trimester, we moved back to the United States, to California. We're in Northern California now, from Germany. So we did an international move while I was very pregnant. And yeah, that was a total crazy adventure. We also have a German Shepherd named Zoe. She just turned 8 years old in January 2020. So that's our family. And what? Are you gonna help tell the story too? What? You're very vocal. YouTuber life with a newborn. So anyway, we came from Germany. That was at the end. We got back to the US on October 29, 2019. We were without a home for over 2 months. So we lived in a hotel for most of that time. And then for a few weeks, we were traveling to see family for our baby showers and for Thanksgiving. But yeah, for most of that time, we were living in a hotel. This is kind of where, now that you guys have a background of where we were coming from, let's jump into his actual birth story, which starts on January 7th. So as a first-time mom, I fully expected to pass my due date. Statistically, first-time moms go past their due date, right? You know, statistically, you will be late for your first baby. And my mom was 5 days late with me. I was the oldest. And so I expected to go at least that long. As my due date approached, the 8th, I was not worried about going into labor, you know, very soon. However, up till that point, for like 4 or 5 days before that, I had been having a lot more Braxton Hicks contractions. And that were not super consistent, but they were more regular than they had been. And so I knew that my body was starting to get ready for labor, but again, I didn't expect to have him on his due date. So another big life change. So we had moved from Germany to California. We didn't have a house yet. And another big life change was that my husband, Mark, had started a master's program. He's getting a master's of science here in California with the military. Like that's like his job right now, is to go to school, and the military's paying for it, blah, blah, blah. So his first day of school was Monday, January 6th. And it was always kind of nutty to say, like, my husband starts school and I have my due date the same week. But again, like I said, I was not worried about going into labor anytime that week at all. So I wasn't worried about like his first week of school, like coinciding with the birth. So finally on Monday night, January 6th, we finally got an offer letter for a home. So then the next day was the day that we worked on signing the lease. It was just like an online process. So we did that first thing after getting up. And then later that day, we were scheduled to go over to the housing office and get our keys and do all that, finalize everything. Another thing we had to do that day was clear out our little storage unit. So because we came from Germany with all the stuff, we came with 9 total suitcases, plus Zoe's big dog crate. And then after we got to California, we had ordered a new king size mattress, like one of those ones that come rolled up. We started accumulating baby stuff, like we got his Halo bassinet and had all this baby stuff from the baby showers. So we needed a storage unit. So we had a storage unit for that, but it renewed on January 8th. And since we knew that we were getting our keys on January 7th, on that Tuesday, we didn't want the unit to renew, right? Because we didn't need it anymore. So another thing we had to do that day was clear that out. Also, all of our stuff would not fit in our SUV. So then we had to go rent a U-Haul van. The next thing on the day's agenda was my 15th prenatal appointment. Yes, I kept track of like how many appointments I had. This ended up being my last prenatal appointment. Of course, I didn't know that at the moment, but this ended up being the last one. That was at 3 o'clock on Tuesday the 7th. Unfortunately, Mark also had an engagement at school at 3 o'clock as well, so he was not able to accompany me to the appointment. He had come to most of my prenatal appointments. Because we only have one vehicle between the two of us, he dropped me off at my appointment a little bit early so he could get over to his thing on campus. So the nurse called me back a little after 3 o'clock and did all the normal checks, weight, blood pressure, and then listened to the baby's heartbeat, and everything checked out. Everything was fine, just as it was at every single appointment up till then. I waited in the room for my doctor to come. It took him a while. He must have had a lot of other patients, but finally he came in. He was like very apologetic, for the wait, but it was fine. So he, felt my stomach, did the normal manual exam, and then he checked for dilation at this appointment because it was my 40-week appointment. And he got this really concerned look on his face, and he was like, I am sending you to the ultrasound room to check the positioning of the baby. And of course, this was totally unexpected, and he did the quickest ultrasound ever, but it literally was just to see where baby's head was. There he is, head up. His head was at the top of my uterus. He was breech. And this was a total shock to both of us because last week when he checked me, they do that manual exam on your stomach and, they can tell like what the baby's positioning is. And he had been head down. He had been head down at his 39-week appointment. And at some point during that week, he flipped to being head up. And so my doctor, I could tell that he was like so shocked and disappointed for me. So he helped me up, helped me sit up, and we sat there and talked about my options. Delivering him in that position was just not an option. So he went through all of my options. He laid everything out so, as clearly as he could, and did not pressure me into anything. He did say that time is of the essence, which I knew it was because I was almost basically 40 weeks and I could go into labor at any point. And you don't want to go into labor with a breech baby because that can turn into an emergency real fast. So he said I had 3 options. So 1, go home and discuss with my husband about what to do, about the options he was about to tell me about. 2, schedule a version procedure. So that's, I believe the official name is an external cephalic version. So it's where the doctor manually manipulates your abdomen or manipulates the baby from outside to get them to turn the head down. Or 3, just forego the version and schedule a C-section before I went into labor. So my mind was kind of reeling at this point because, first of all, it was a shock that he was breech this late in the game. I had no idea that babies could turn when they were practically ready to be delivered, when they were full term. And 2, I was just trying to take in all of this information that my doctor was giving me. You know, you have pregnancy brain. My husband wasn't there. I found myself wishing that he had been there so that I had a second pair of ears listening and I could just kind of bounce things off of him. But you know, he wasn't, so I had to accept that reality. But so I think my doctor could tell that I was a little bit overwhelmed, and he asked, after he laid out everything, he asked me, what is your gut telling you? And that was like the best question to ask me, because I knew that my gut was telling me to schedule a version ASAP. Like, don't consult with Mark. You know, it's gonna just have to work with his school schedule. This is really, really important. And let's just schedule the version ASAP. So he was like, that's great, fine, let's do that. So then we discussed pain management, because having a version can be extremely painful, okay? Because they are manually trying to make the baby turn. And I thought about it for a moment, and I was like, I was planning on having an unmedicated vaginal delivery, but because this is like a medical procedure and wouldn't be producing a baby at the end, I was like, you know what, I would like to opt for pain management. He sent me to the front office and had the front office lady schedule me for the version at the hospital, because they have to monitor the baby, because there is a risk with doing a version. There's a risk that their heart rate can drop, you know, they can go into distress. And then of course, again, that would be an emergency. So they want to monitor you. And then of course you're getting anesthesia and you have to wait until it wears off. Anyway, so the front desk lady scheduled that for 7:30 the very next morning, the morning of Wednesday the 8th. And I needed to be there by 6 a.m. Mark was done at school, so he was able, because it was like 4:15 by this time. So he was able to come get me. We drove back to the hotel and we discussed things on the way back. And this is when I started really getting stressed out. And I really shouldn't have gotten so stressed out, but I did. You know, this was just such a big deal. While it was difficult to take in the information, I wasn't stressed about having the version. I was confident in my doctor's ability. And I wasn't even stressed or worried about the idea of having a C-section if he did not turn. Oh yeah, that's the other thing I forgot to mention. So if he did turn, which was very likely, like apparently my doctor's turn rate is 2/3 of the time it's successful. So the likelihood of him turning was very high. But if he did not turn, so if he turned, then I would just go home and wait for natural labor to start. Now, if you're in this position, the risk for doing that is that the baby could flip back to being breech, and then you could either like do another version or just do a C-section. But I was willing to take that risk. And because my doctor did give me the option of like, oh, we can induce like right after he turns, but I was like, no, I would rather just wait for natural labor. He was totally cool with that. Did not pressure me at all. So I really, really appreciated that. Anyway, so if he did not turn, then we would go immediately to a C-section. So I was not even worried about that scenario happening. However, what was stressing me out was the fact that it just seemed like really difficult for Mark to get off of school. And in reality, I was blowing it out of proportion in my head. I was complicating things. You know, it was just very emotional. So I felt really, really stressed out over this process that Mark had to go through to like notify his professors and notify, I won't even get into it. It's just the military can seem very complicated at times. And anyway, that is what was stressing me out. Not the fact that we had a breech baby and I might have a C-section. I was like, no, we're just gonna go with the flow. It's gonna be cool. Everything's gonna be fine. because of this, I was like, I need to call the doctor and see how immediate a C-section would need to be. Like, can we have a little lead time? Could it be the next day so that Mark can give his professors a heads up, like tomorrow I won't be here? So we called the doctor, waited a while to talk to him, finally talked to him, and told him what all these thoughts that we were having. And he said to me, Mallory, this is how I see it. How do you want things to happen? And it was so comforting to me. And I said, well, if he doesn't turn, then I don't see any reason to wait, like to do a C-section the next day. I see no reason to wait because pain control will be in place. Like, might as well just go and do it. And he said, okay, then that's what we're gonna do. And he said, you do not need to consider the military first. You need to consider yourself first, you know. And anyway, so he was just very encouraging. So by the time we got off the phone with the doctor, it was nearly 5 o'clock, which was when hi buddy, you're awake, which is when our appointment was with the housing office. So Mark went and got changed out of his uniform into civilians, and then we went over there. So the first thing that we had to do was to do a walkthrough of our home to note damages. So there was a lot of damages, so that took like 15 to 20 minutes. And then we had to go back to the office and finalize, like finish signing the papers, get our keys, all this stuff. And the lady was so kind, but it felt like she was taking forever. And the reason we felt like we were in this time crunch is because the storage place, remember we hadn't gone over to the storage unit yet, the storage place closed at 6 o'clock. And we had to be there before 6 o'clock to get our stuff out. Otherwise, our unit would renew the next day, and we didn't want that to happen. So we're like discreetly checking the time, like felt like she was taking forever. Finally, at like 5:45, we're done. And we like rush over there and we get there with like 8 minutes to spare. Thankfully, we were able to stay in there till like 7 or later. So we didn't have to clear everything out by 6. That would not have been realistic. But anyway, so we cleared everything out, loaded it up into the U-Haul. I mean, Mark did most of it because I obviously couldn't do any heavy lifting being very pregnant. So then by the time we headed back to the hotel, I think it was maybe around 7-ish or a little before 7. It was dark, we were hungry, and so Mark suggested that we just order from Uber Eats. Never had done that before, but I was like, okay, let's try it. And I ordered us some barbecue from this barbecue place. So while we were waiting for dinner to be delivered, Mark got on his computer and started going through the process of notifying his professors, like, hey, my wife has a complication of her pregnancy. And I needed to like verbally vent and process everything that had happened. Because again, I was still like really stressed out over the military thing. So I called my mom. They were like east of Flagstaff, Arizona at this point, and they were driving, and they were in an area where the reception was really bad, so the call kept dropping. During this call, actually, something that my doctor said to do in between the appointment and the version was to do this exercise to try to encourage the baby to turn. He said sometimes it works and they just turn on their own. And it's where, I think it's called a semi-inversion, but basically it's where you put your face on the floor, like on a pillow, and you put your butt in the air and you just sit like that for like a few minutes. And he said, just do it at a few minutes at a time just to see if maybe the baby will turn on his own. So I did that while I was talking to my mom. And she was like, she really helped talk me down from my stress. She was like, you know, I think you're blowing things out of proportion, like in a nice way. You know, you need to calm down. It's gonna be fine, you know, like it's gonna be fine, Mallory. So that was really helpful to hear that from her. Our dinner arrived around 7:30. Also around this time, around 7:30 is when I felt my first contraction of the evening. And little did I know, but that was actually the start of labor, but I did not realize it. I just thought that it was another Braxton Hicks. It wasn't super painful. It did last longer than a typical Braxton Hicks. It was like 1 minute and 40 seconds. So that was a lot longer than they normally were. But I was like, oh, like it's just, I'm having Braxton Hicks again tonight. Just like the last few nights. So I didn't really think anything of it. Soon after that, Mark's mom started a group FaceTime with us and with Mark's brother, and his dad was there also on the call. And so we all chatted for a little while and, you know, just got caught up on life. And I ate my dinner. I did have the thought of like, oh no, like what if this actually is labor? Am I gonna regret eating these baby back ribs? So then after our call and finishing my dinner, I decided to take our dog out to go potty and to go for a little walk, because during the call with Mark's family, I had about 3 more contractions, but they still seemed like typical Braxton Hicks. So typically when I would get Braxton Hicks during my pregnancy, I would get them when I had been sitting for a while or lounging around. And if I got up and I moved around, then they would stop. So I thought, okay, I'm gonna go on this walk and see if they stop. Well, they didn't stop, they continued. And I had 2 contractions on the walk, which had never happened before. So this was highly unusual. And so I wondered if maybe this was different, but again, I was like kind of in denial that it could be actual labor. So then when we got back to the hotel, my hospital bags were mostly packed, like my main suitcase, but I started getting together like last minute things to take to the hospital. Just in case the version didn't work, we could have our bags in the car, and then, you know, we would be ready for the hospital stay. And the contractions continued. The contractions were not super consistent. They, like, some were 15 minutes apart, some were 5, some were 10. You know, I just kept timing them and keeping an eye on it. So I didn't even tell Mark. That's another thing about this whole thing, is that Mark didn't realize that I was in labor until like right before we went to the hospital. Because I was like, you know, he's busy. He was like working on schoolwork at that time, on his computer, and I like didn't want to bother him. So I was like, whatever, I didn't even know if it was labor or not, so why say anything? Yeah. So by this time, my parents had arrived in their hotel at Flagstaff and had much better reception. So I finally got to talk with my mom for a good chunk of time. At one point during our conversation, I was like, okay, that contraction was a little more intense, but still, it wasn't enough to make me think that I was in labor. So I got off the phone with my mom around 10 p.m. If you don't know this, I'm a night owl, so 10 p.m. was like not that late. And with the version procedure, you need to fast for 8 hours beforehand. And so I needed to stop eating and drinking, even water. You can't even have water. So I needed to start fasting at 11 p.m. So at around 10, I was like, I'm gonna have a treat. It's gonna be my last thing that I eat before I have this procedure. And I had some like chocolate Valencia orange ice cream from Whole Foods. It was so yummy. So I treated myself to that and just, you know, tried to relax. And then I started, like around 10:30, I started working on my bullet journal. Like I needed to set up my monthly log for January. So it's like my monthly calendar. And right as I started working on it, Mark finished with whatever he was working on. And he was like, okay, we need to go over to the house with the U-Haul and unload everything. At this point, the contractions had continued. I was starting to get a little tired, and I just really wanted to get a bath. I wanted to take an Epsom salt bath because that always helped me feel better. I wanted to see if a bath would help stop the contractions, but I was like, okay, it's gonna have to wait till after we get back from unloading our stuff, because then we needed to return the U-Haul that night. You could do like a self-return. I followed Mark over there in our SUV, and he drove the U-Haul, and we started carrying things in. Now, of course, again, I could not really carry much because of being super pregnant, so I just carried light things. Our garage is a detached garage, so you have to walk across the rather long yard to get into the house, and then we have a 2-story house. So I was walking back and forth, back and forth. I even hopped into the back of the U-Haul a few times. I went up the stairs a few times, all while I was actually in labor. But again, I was totally in denial. I totally was like, this is not real. Like, I'm not actually in labor, but the contractions were starting to get a little more intense and a little closer together. Still not that consistent 5-1-1 rule where it's like 5 minutes apart, lasting a minute, you know, for that going on for 1 hour. That's the 511 rule. Sometimes it's the 411 rule. I was like, I'm not meeting that, so it can't be labor, right? So, but there were a few times I was carrying this box. It was like a box of cleaning supplies. It was probably a little heavier than I should have carried, but I carried it anyway. And I was carrying it into the house, and I had a contraction, and I had to drop the box and just breathe through the contraction. So they were starting to get, like, this was probably maybe around 11-ish. They were starting to get a little more intense. And then when we were almost finished, I had a contraction on the back porch. And this time Mark saw me again. You guys, I had not said anything to Mark about having these contractions. They started at 7:30, and here we are like at 11:30, and I still have not told my husband that I'm having these contractions. They're getting worse. They're getting closer together. So anyway, so I have this contraction standing on the back porch, and Mark saw me. He was like in the garage and like looking across the yard at me. And I was just standing there like, and he was like, "What's wrong?" And I just said very calmly, I'm having a contraction. And like didn't say anything else. Like I didn't say these been going on, they've been getting worse. You know, I just said, I'm having a contraction. So he was like, okay. Like he knew that I had been having Braxton Hicks in previous days. Finally, the last thing we needed to do that night was to return the U-Haul to the self-return. So it wasn't that far of a drive. So again, I drove our SUV so that we could drive back together, and then Mark drove the U-Haul. So we get in the car in our respective vehicles, and I'm hoping that I don't have a contraction on the way there, because at this point, some of the contractions are like 10 or more minutes apart, and it was like less than 10 minutes to the U-Haul place. So I was like, okay, I really hope I don't have another contraction while I'm driving. But I had one while I was driving. You guys, I was in labor and I was driving a vehicle. Not a smart idea. Contractions they're really like a wave. Like you kind of feel them coming, and they do feel like bad menstrual cramps, and you kind of feel the contraction, and then it kind of peaks, and it's like at its worst, and then it comes down. Thankfully, I started praying like, please let this not be very bad. And thankfully it was not that bad. It was like probably 30 seconds or less. So I wasn't like super distracted while I was driving. It was not a dangerous situation. So we pull into the U-Haul place, and Mark is over there like filling out the paperwork and doing whatever you have to do to return it. So I'm sitting in the driver's seat of the SUV, and I guess that contraction probably was like maybe 5 minutes apart from the one I had when I was driving. So while I was sitting there in the driver's seat, I had the worst contraction up till that point. And it was fist clenching, you guys. It was starting to rain outside. So I was like trapped in the driver's seat. I couldn't move. And I think not being able to move made it feel worse. And I totally ignored everything that I learned in my birth class. I was like tensing up. I was clenching my fists. I was digging them into my thighs and just like kind of holding my breath. That wasn't helpful either. Like if you breathe through your contractions and you just relax your body, it's so much easier to get through them. But this one was pretty bad. And all of this time I was like texting my mom back and forth. Before I had this contraction, I texted my mom, and let me read you what I texted her. So I said, so I don't know, these contractions are starting to get painful and a little closer together. Like now they're averaging a little under 9 minutes apart. We just moved all our storage stuff into the house, and there were several times I had to stop walking and just take a moment. They're starting to tire me out a little. And so my mom suggested that because I had a known breech baby, that I should call the doctor. And then I had that super intense contraction, and I texted my mom, and I was like, I don't think these are Braxton Hicks. And this was, the interval was like about 6 minutes. So finally at like almost 11:45 at night, 4 hours later, I'm finally realizing like, I don't think this is Braxton Hicks. I think this might be real labor. And she was like, you better call. So Mark finishes up with the U-Haul, and he hops into the into the passenger seat of the SUV, and he looks at me to like drive home or drive back to the hotel. And I look back at him and I was like, you need to drive. And he says, why? Again, he was totally oblivious through no fault of his own, you guys, okay? Like, ladies, do not keep it from your husband when you're in labor. So it was not his fault that he was oblivious, because I had kept him in the dark. So I finally told him that I had been having contractions all evening and that I didn't think they were Braxton Hicks anymore, and that I needed to call my doctor because of him being breech. So we switch places. I get in the passenger seat. We drive home. It's like cold, raining. And I waited, and I should have called the doctor immediately, but I waited till we got back to the parking lot of the hotel, because in my silly pregnant mind, I was like, what if my doctor hears that we're in the car and the windshield wipers are going, and he's wondering like, why the heck is my full-term pregnant patient who's gonna have a version at early the next morning, why is she gallivanting around at midnight? Of course, he wouldn't have been able to tell, like, he wouldn't have thought that, and even if he could have heard that we were in the car, like, he wouldn't have cared. So anyway, but I waited till we were parked, and I called my doctor, and I could tell, like, I woke him up from sleeping, and I was like, hi doctor so-and-so, and I apologized. Why I felt the need to apologize, I don't know. I said, I hate to bother you so late, but you know, and then I explained, like, I'd been having contractions and they were getting worse, you know, the breech baby, you know, what do you want me to do? And so he asked me some questions about exactly how bad they were, what the intervals were. And at this point they were averaging about 8 minutes apart. So still they weren't averaging 5 minutes apart, but some were 5 minutes or less apart. And so his conclusion was like, yeah, you got to get checked. And he said that if I was in active labor, and I was pretty progressed, that doing a version wouldn't be possible. So he's like, call the birth center at the hospital and I'll meet you there. I look over at Mark and he's like, well, I guess you're having a C-section after all. And I was just in total disbelief. I was like, I'm not ready, which is so funny because for weeks I had been saying I'm ready for him to come whenever he's ready. You know, I had my bag packed, you know, I just could not wait to have him in my arms. And now that it was upon us, I was just like gripped with this unusual fear. And it's not like I didn't want him to come. I think it was just that feeling of being out of control of the situation and kind of in disbelief that this was actually going to happen this way. Like, if I was in labor, that I was going to have a C-section. We went back to our hotel room, and by this time it was just a few minutes to midnight. And so I realized, like, if this is for real, then this baby is coming on his due date, which is really cool. But I just felt really weird. We were both like really quiet. We finished getting our bags together. It was still raining a little bit. Mark pulled the car up and we were on our way to the hospital. But like, we didn't like, you know, we weren't like frantically rushing, but I think we left like around, it was like 12:20. I did have a contraction that was pretty bad right before we left. So then we drove. I didn't have any contractions the whole time. We drove to the hospital, and the hospital was like only 6 minutes away. So that's really nice. But also my fear was that we would get to the hospital, they would check me and they would tell me, oh, you're not actually in labor, go home. I was like so afraid of looking stupid, you guys. So, because it was past midnight, we pulled into the ER, the ER entrance, and I went to the, you know, check-in desk and checked in, you know, told them why I was there, said I think I might be in labor. And also I was feeling a little self-conscious because I was still feeling pretty good. I hadn't had another contraction yet. And I had been taught that if you're really in labor, like, you're going to be really in distress, like you're not going to be able to smile or laugh or be your normal self. But I was feeling like pretty normal, but I felt like I kind of had to fake like feeling bad because I didn't want them to think I was faking being in labor, which was, again, so dumb of me to worry about that. So I was like leaning on kind of putting my head in my hand, just like leaning there waiting and like trying to not sound too chipper. So dumb. So then finally, so the medical escort comes and she offers me a wheelchair. And I was like, no, I'm okay. I can walk. What is wrong with me? So Mark takes all our luggage. I'm just like carrying my purse and my water bottle. And I had a contraction while walking. I should have taken the wheelchair. So we arrive at the nurse's station and I tell them, like, I think I'm in labor. I have a version scheduled for tomorrow, but you know, the baby's breech and I'm in labor. So my doctor said to come in. So this blonde haired younger nurse took me back into like a triage surgery prep room. The nurse instructed me, you know, the standard procedure: get undressed, put on the hospital gown, get in the bed. Now that we were at the hospital, like our moods kind of lifted. Like I said, we had been kind of quiet getting ready to go to the hospital, but once we were there, like Mark was kind of making jokes and making me laugh a little bit. And so I got into the bed, and the nurse, that original nurse, hooked me up to the fetal heart rate monitor and the contraction monitor. And then another nurse hooked me or put an IV in my hand and hooked me up to IV fluids. This is where it gets a little confusing and where I can't quite remember everything like chronologically, because there were so many people in and out of the room like prepping me. So it's kind of hard. So I wrote down things as best I could remember. So one of the first things that my original nurse did was check for dilation. And she told me that I was 5 to 6 centimeters dilated. Then in my discharge report from the doctor, he said that I was 6 to 7 centimeters dilated and that transition was imminent. Like I was on the verge of transition. So you have active labor, which is like the first part, and then you have transition, which is from 7 to 10 centimeters dilated before you start pushing. And transition is when things start getting more intense and the contractions are really, really bad. So I was about to transition. Like, I can't believe it. Like, I labored all that time, and she was like, you're really efficient, because I'd only been laboring for 5 hours, and really for most of that time I didn't think it was real labor. So it really wasn't that bad. It was getting bad though. I did have a few contractions while I was lying in the bed. At like one point, Mark was standing right there and was holding my hand, and I had a contraction and I was just squeezing his hand so hard, but I was breathing through them. This was around 12:45 that I got checked. So then one of the next big things that they needed to do was to check and see, to just double check that the baby was still breech, because if he had turned for some reason, then, you know, I could go to a labor and delivery room and labor as normal, and I wouldn't need a C-section. And the nurse did give me a tiny sliver of hope that maybe he had turned because of where she found his heartbeat. And she was like, I forget exactly where it was, but she said, oh, a lot of times when the heart beats in this place that it's at, it means that they're head down. So I was like, maybe he did turn, but I hadn't felt any big movements. The on-call doctor for that night, who would be assisting with the C-section, he came in and did the ultrasound to check, and unfortunately he still was head up, he was still his breech, and that meant we were officially having a C-section. So at that point, like as soon as that was determined, like I think that is when it really started getting confusing, because people were in and out, the nurses, the lab tech to draw my blood, the anesthesiologist, my doctor, the assistant, the on-call doctor, like all these people in and out attending to me, because I was in active labor. I was about to transition. I was a little bit scared of getting the urge to push, because you don't want to push with a breech baby. In the moment, I didn't really think of it as an emergency, because I don't know, like it's not like people were frantic. It was very busy, but it's not like there was franticness going on. But really looking back, I realized like it was an emergency, because I was in active labor, because I was progressing so quickly and I was about to transition. Like they needed to get me into the OR ASAP. Thankfully, I didn't need to be put under, because it wasn't like that big of an emergency, but it, you know, still he needed to get out like ASAP. So all these people are coming in and out to attend to me. I was given, you know, like that blue cap. Mark was given blue scrubs to put on over his clothing. The anesthesiologist came in and spoke with me about the pain management. So I would be having a spinal block, and he explained the procedure. I made sure that he knew that my spine is fused and I have rods in my back because I had scoliosis surgery. So he was like, that's fine, like it shouldn't be a problem. Thankfully it was not. He did tell me that, you know, the anesthesia can make you feel dizzy or nauseated, or you could even vomit. You know, they asked me like when I last ate something, and I said it was 10 o'clock and it was ice cream. So they explained the C-section to me. They would be doing a very low cut in my abdomen. Another thing they did, it was like around 1:30 in the morning. They gave me antacid to drink. It's the nastiest drink ever. And then at that point, that was like one of the last things they did, was give me that drink. And before I knew it, I was being helped off the table, or off the bed, and walked into the OR. So Mark followed us out into the hallway outside the OR, so he was not allowed in until I was like pretty much ready to go. So I went into the OR with one of the nurses, and she helped me up on the operating table, and I sat on the edge, and the first thing they had to do was to give me the spinal. So I sat on the edge of the table, and my doctor, my OB, was standing in front of me. I was really surprised that he actually was the one helping me with this, that it wasn't a nurse. But anyway, so he stood in front of me and like put his hands on my shoulders and like had me, I would demonstrate, but I don't want to wake him up. But anyway, it's like when you're getting an epidural and you have to like slouch your shoulders as far as you can, arch your back, which I can't really arch mine very well because of being fused, but arch your back as much as you can and put your chin to your chest. And you have to hold really, really still. Thankfully, I did not, like from the time that I left the triage room and got numbed, I did not have any more contractions. So thankfully I didn't contract while he was putting it in. The spinal, it was not that bad. I know a lot of people get freaked out about getting a needle put into your spine, but it really wasn't that bad. So basically while I'm sitting there, the anesthesiologist numbed the area. So you feel like kind of a prick for that, you know, a little bit of a twinge pain. And then the spinal, it's not like an epidural, so nothing stays, no device stays in your spine. So they just shoot you up with this anesthetic, and then that's it. So you hardly even feel it when they put the anesthetic in because you're numbed there. And then you have to lie down on the table pretty quickly because the anesthesia takes effect very fast. So they assisted me with lying down, and it was the weirdest feeling to like feel myself from like not quite the chest, but like below my sternum all the way to my toes. It was the weirdest feeling to lie there awake, because I've had other surgeries before. I've been put under before, so I know what it's like to fall asleep from anesthesia, but I had never had this kind of anesthesia, and it was kind of like a warm wave washing over my lower half. And like before I knew it, I was completely numb. I couldn't move my legs or my toes. I couldn't really feel what they were doing to me. They were like washing me up. They were putting a urinary catheter in, turning on the compression devices on my legs to prevent blood clots. Like I hardly felt any of that because I was pretty much numb within a few minutes. Thankfully, it did not make me feel dizzy or nauseated, and I did not throw up. But what did happen, the side effect that I did have, was shakiness. So this is totally normal. The anesthesiologist assured me that it was normal. So I'm laying there, and they put these, like your arms are out like you're gonna make a snow angel. You have a blood pressure cuff on one arm, a pulse oximeter for your oxygen on the other hand, and you're lying there like this with your arms out. And I was shaking uncontrollably, and that's just unfortunately a side effect of the medication, of the anesthesia. Also, operating rooms are very, very cold to prevent growth of bacteria. Here I'm going into my nurse mode right now. So they gave me some warm blankets to try to help calm that a little bit. It helped a little bit, but not completely. So don't be surprised, like if you get a spinal, if you start shaking. There were like so many people in the room, like probably at least 9 to 10 people, because we had the 2 doctors, the anesthesiologist, at least like 2 to 3 nurses, surgical techs, and then the pediatric team. So the pediatrician and maybe like 1 or 2 people from the nursery or from pediatrics. So, you know, just in case there's a complication with the baby. Finally, I'm lying there and the doctors, they put the blue drape up at some point. They put the blue drape. And so, you know, I can't really see what's going on. And then finally I hear my doctor saying, "Hey, Mallory, how are you feeling?" And I knew that he had done a test cut to see if I was completely numb. And I was like, I'm feeling good. Like everything's fine. So it was at that point that Mark was brought in. I heard somebody call out, "Okay, bring Dad in." So Mark was brought in and he had a chair on like kind of to the left side of my head. And the anesthesiologist was at the other side, monitoring my vitals and everything. It was only like a few minutes after Mark came into the room that they immediately started the surgery. They started cutting me open, and literally like a few minutes after that is when Max was born. Oh, before I get to the actual birth, so Mark was like really interested in the surgery and he wanted to watch, like he wanted to watch them cut me open and do everything. So he's like starting to stand up to look over the blue drape, and he was like, "Oh, can I watch?" And as he's standing up, and then the anesthesiologist is like, "No, no, 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 no," and he like gently pushing him down by the shoulder. And he was like, "No, no, no, you don't want to watch." And Mark's like trying to stand up again. And he was like, "No, I've been in combat, like blood doesn't bother me." And like he totally could have handled it. But the anesthesiologist was like, "We've seen too many husbands faint in here. Like, no, you can't watch." And then it was only like a couple minutes and then Max was being born. So he did stand up at that point and started taking pictures. But apparently he came out butt first. So he must have been like his spine must have been facing out. So, and he was just head up. So his butt was like right there near the bottom. He must have been Frank Breech, I guess. So his butt was at the very bottom of my uterus, like probably right where they did the cut, and they took him out, and it was surreal, you guys. Like I heard, just hearing his first cry, and having waited 9 months for this moment, and finally it was there, and like he was screaming and he was pink and he was just so healthy looking. Of course, I'm saying all this after seeing pictures, but you know, just hearing that cry, in a way it was weird because here I am lying on this operating table and I'm not having to give any effort. I'm completely numb. I'm not able to see what's going on, and my son is being born without me having to do anything or be in any pain whatsoever. So it was just like a weird situation, but also so amazing, so amazing. And you know, I'm like smiling so big and I'm like starting to cry, like hearing him cry. It was like the culmination of everything you've waited for, especially with the infertility journey and just being in disbelief that, oh my gosh, my baby has been born, like he's here. So Mark is taking pictures, and I had requested that the doctor lift him up so I could see him right away at least. But unfortunately, he didn't lift him quite high enough because all I saw was the top of his head. But I did see that he had this like darkish hair. It's lightened up a little bit, but it looked pretty dark at the time. And Mark was looking over and like calling out to me like, "He's perfect. He's looking great. You know, he has hair." And it was just so amazing. So Mark got to cut the cord, and then after they lifted him up to show me, then he was taken over to the warmer, like in the corner of the OR, to the pediatric team for them to like do his initial checks, like APGAR scores, and like kind of wipe him off, you know, just make sure that he was okay, suction him, because, you know, with being a C-section baby, they're not going through the birth canal where they're being squeezed and all the junk is getting out of their lungs. So, you know, they have to make sure that they're breathing okay and all of that. So Mark, at that point, Mark went over and, you know, watched them do all that. And then, I mean, it couldn't have been that long. It seemed it seemed long, but it probably wasn't that long. It was just, again, it's just like strange lying there and you could hear your baby, but you can't see him, and they're like doing stuff. His full name is Maximilian John Mayor, but we call him Max. So Max he was swaddled up in, you know, those cute hospital swaddles, and he was brought over to me, and Mark sat down and he helped lay Max on my chest. We didn't get to do skin to skin, and we were like face to face. I'll put a picture in. It was just the best moment ever. It was just so amazing. Like that photo, you know, looking at it, it's like that typical, you know, OR C-section first picture, first family photo. And I never expected for that to be our first photo. I, you know, envisioned my birth, giving birth vaginally, and like having him on my chest, naked, skin to skin, having pushed him out, and just envisioning that as our first photo together. And, you know, the first photo of him. So it was definitely different than I envisioned, but I mean, I was just on cloud 9, ecstatic, just total bliss. I mean, there's really no way to fully explain what it feels like. So he sat on my chest for a little while. At first I was keeping my arms out, and then finally somebody said to me, like, you know, you can move your arms, you know, you can hold him, you know. So I put this arm, my right arm, and like just kind of held him, and it was amazing, amazing. And so he was born at 1:54 a.m. on January 8th, 2020. So after a few minutes of sitting there with him, then he was taken away again to, I guess, do more checks. So Mark went with him at that point. I don't know if it was the nursery, or I think it was a recovery room that they took him to. So Mark accompanied him there, and Mark got to do skin to skin with him. So I'll put a picture of that too. So he didn't get to do skin to skin with me, but he did get to do skin to skin with his dad first. And so that's really special that they got to bond in that way. And I think I had that on my birth wishes for Mark to do skin to skin with Max if I wasn't able to in the event of a C-section. And I think it's standard protocol at our hospital anyway. So that's really great that he was able to do that. So then the longest part of the C-section was actually getting stitched up. So, you know, there's a lot of blood, there's a lot of fluid, you know, they have to take the placenta out. I unfortunately didn't get to see my placenta. I didn't even think to ask to see it. It's just like so many things are going on, and there's things that if I had another C-section that I would do differently. But of course, just in the moment with it being an emergency, you just don't think of these things. Anyway, so it probably took like 20 to 30 minutes to stitch me up, and it went really well. A nurse later told me that my incision looked beautiful. So, and the on-call doctor, the doctor assisting my doctor, he was like, "Oh, you have great anatomy. Like, you could do this 5 or 6 more times." And I was like, thanks. What a compliment. So I thought that was funny. So when they were finished, after about half an hour, then the blue drape was taken down. It took like a whole team of people to move me to the recovery room bed because I was still completely numb. Then I was wheeled into the recovery room, and I was there alone for a little bit because the nurse had to make sure that I was stable and like not in pain. I still couldn't feel anything, but I wasn't groggy or anything like that. So after a little bit, then the nurse asked if I wanted to have the baby brought in, and I said, of course, definitely. And Mark also came in. So one of the nursery nurses brought him in, wheeled him in his bassinet, and we got to do skin to skin. We got to breastfeed, and he latched right on, nursed like a champ. It was amazing. Just that first bonding experience. So then, I don't know, maybe after an hour or two of being in the recovery room, I was doing really well, and he was doing really well. So then we were taken to our LDPR room, which is labor, delivery, postpartum recovery. So if you have a vaginal birth at my hospital, you do everything in one room. So by this time, it was probably like 3:30 in the morning, at least, or 4. And we did not sleep a wink that night, just from excitement and adrenaline and just getting used to him. And, you know, basically I cuddled with him on and off all night, and Mark was up. Yeah, we did not sleep. So that was a really, really long first day because we had been up since Tuesday morning. And so I was up most of Wednesday. I probably dozed like maybe for an hour or two. This video is very long, so I'm gonna try to wrap it up since that's the story of his birth. But we were there until Saturday. So I gave birth in the wee hours in the morning on Wednesday. And then we got discharged on Saturday afternoon, which is pretty typical to stay like 3 or 4 nights if you have a C-section. And I could have gone home on Friday. My doctor gave me the option of going home on Friday, but I felt like I just needed that one more day. Plus, we still were not like totally moved into our house yet because we didn't have furniture. So we would be going back to our hotel anyway. So I was like, I would rather just stay here in the hospital as long as I can. So that's what we did. That second night was a struggle, like they say. The second night after giving birth is hard. Then on Saturday when we got discharged, we went back to the hotel. And the funny thing is that I had joked about this happening. Like I had joked that wouldn't it be funny if we brought our newborn home to a hotel, and it actually happened. So his first home was a hotel room. So we were in the hotel for 2 more nights, Saturday and Sunday night. And then on Monday, we moved into our house, like officially. Also, my parents arrived on Wednesday night, so they got to see him during his first 24 hours. And they were there at the hospital every day with the 3 of us. And it was just really nice to have them there. And then especially moving into our house, getting our household goods on that Tuesday after getting discharged, and just setting the whole house up. They were here for a month, which was just amazing. So that is his birth story. He's starting to wake up a little bit. I'm getting hot holding you. I guess this is your second nap of the day. So cute. Look at his hands. I love his birth story. I think it's amazing. Of course, I'm biased because I'm his mom, but it was a wild ride. It was totally what I did not expect, but I love our story so much, and I can't wait to tell him about it when he gets older. I hope you guys enjoyed hearing about our crazy journey. I hope that it was enjoyable to hear about, especially again if you're getting ready to give birth. Really the recovery, I'll talk about recovery in another video, but recovery has not been that bad at all. And they say that C-sections are harder than vaginal births. So it's been great. I mean, I wouldn't go out and get a C-section just for the heck of it, but since I had one, I can say that it really wasn't that bad. Anyway, I'm going to sign off. If you are new here, welcome. If you are a returning subscriber, thank you so much for watching this video. Thank you everybody for watching this video. Make sure to hit the red subscribe button down below so that you can see more. I'm going to be doing a 1-month baby update, postpartum update soon. So stay tuned for that, and lots of other videos about our life here in California as a military spouse, as a new mom to a little boy. Love being a boy mom, and #boymom. So leave a blue heart below if you're a boy mom. That's it for now. So thanks for hanging with me throughout this journey, and until the next video, take care everybody. Bye.